I worked the night shift as a security guard at a grocery store. They left me a strange set of rules. I saw the job posting 2 weeks ago. Night security guard wanted at West Supermarket in Bang Pia. Shift from 12 a.m. to 6 a.m., $21 an hour. Right from the start, I thought it was strange. What kind of grocery store needs a security guard when it's closed? Is crime really that bad around here? But I needed the money. Badly. And 2 days later, after a phone interview with a man named Clive, I started my first shift. As soon as I parked my car, I partly understood why they needed a night guard. The store sat on the edge of a rundown shopping center. Large signs hung on the windows with the word Choutway printed on them. But judging by the dusty glass and the flickering streetlights, it looked like no one had cared about the place for years. I parked near the front entrance. As I approached the building, I saw a woman hurrying out of the store. "You're Aaron, right?" she asked, out of breath. "The night guard?" "That's right. Clive left instructions for you. I put them on the conveyor belt at Register 1. She nodded politely, then walked past me toward the only other car in the parking lot. "Thanks. Be friendly," a voice inside my head reminded me. She's my new co-worker, after all. I turned around. "Hey, what's your name?" But she had already hurried into her car. The door slammed shut, the car backed out of the parking lot, and then she was gone. So much for making a new friend. I turned back toward the store. The parking lot was completely empty now, and the nearest streetlight flickered in a strange, uneven rhythm. A cold gust of wind swept through, carrying a crumpled paper bag across the lot. Well, here goes nothing. I walked into the store. The glass door squealed as it opened, and I stepped inside. Despite its worn-out appearance, the inside of the store looked fairly decent. Bright fluorescent lights shone down from the ceiling, and jazz music played from hidden speakers. I walked over to Register 1, where a folded sheet of paper was waiting for me. I opened it and began to read. "Dear Aaron. Welcome to the West family. We sincerely hope you enjoy your first shift. To assist you, we have compiled a list of rules intended to make your shift as easy as freshly baked apple pie. 1. As the night guard, you must patrol the store every 30 minutes to ensure everything is in order. You may spend the remaining time in the break room at the back of the store monitoring the security cameras. 2. Do not enter aisle 7. Do not look down aisle 7. 3. If you hear knocking coming from inside the freezer in the frozen foods section, ignore it. 4. If you see a shopping cart that has not been returned to its proper place, please take it to the designated cart area at the front of the store immediately. 5. Do not panic if you see a pool of blood in the meat section. Sometimes meat packages leak. Simply go to the supply room, get a mop and a bucket, and clean it up. However, do not step in the blood or touch it in any way. 6. If you see a woman in the store, immediately go to the break room and remain there until she leaves. Do not call the police or report an intruder. Do not look into her eyes. 7. The music playing in the store is a pre-recorded instrumental jazz track. If the music stops, immediately go to the break room and remain there until it starts playing again. 8. Under no circumstances are you to end your shift early. Thank you very much, and once again, have a wonderful shift. Signed, Clive. I stared at the rules, reading them again slowly. They were bizarre. A woman in the store. Stay away from aisle 7. I had never received instructions like these before, even when I worked security at a nightclub in one of the roughest parts of the city. Maybe this was some kind of test. Maybe they wanted to see how well I could follow completely ridiculous instructions. I looked up at the security camera mounted in the corner of the wall, watching me. All right then. Challenge accepted. I checked the time on my phone. 12:06 a.m. Maybe I should do an initial patrol before settling in. Walking through a store this empty and quiet felt genuinely strange. All the bread and muffins had been put away somewhere. Opaque white plastic sheets had been pulled down over the produce section to keep the cold in. When I reached the end of the row, I turned right into the meat section. The meat display cases had also been covered with plastic sheets. I could see flashes of red through the gaps. They were enormous ribeye and sirloin cuts. Huge slabs of meat, still attached to the bone. I quickly looked away. Even though I wasn't a vegetarian, I didn't like looking at raw meat. I headed toward the other aisles. Aisle 3, pasta and sauce, neatly arranged on shelves, gleaming under the fluorescent lights. Aisle 4, cookies and snack foods. Aisle 5. Aisle 6. Oh, right. I didn't look into aisle 7. I forced myself to keep my eyes on the floor. Yeah, it seemed ridiculous, but they had told me not to look. In case they reviewed the CCTV footage later to evaluate my job performance, I was going to follow every rule. I continued deeper into the store. A few minutes later, I found the break room. An unremarkable brown door with a small square window cut into it. I memorized its location so I could find it later if needed. As soon as I finished my first patrol, I planned to take out my laptop and continue watching. Yesterday, my laptop had still been broken. Then I reached the western side of the store, the frozen foods section. I walked down the aisle toward the front entrance. That's when I saw it. A shopping cart sat crookedly in the middle of the aisle. I let out a sigh. Of all the rules, this was the one that annoyed me the most. I had been hired as a security guard, not a janitor. Wasn't it the employee's job to put all the carts away before closing? Sighing, I began pushing the cart toward the front of the store. The wheels rolled smoothly beneath my hands. Soft jazz music drifted around me. I turned the corner by the checkout area and headed toward the front entrance. That's when I heard it. A faint sound, almost impossible to hear over the jazz music. I stopped and listened carefully. Several seconds of silence passed. Then I heard it again. It sounded like someone crying. The hairs on the back of my neck stood up. There wasn't supposed to be anyone here. The doors had been locked the entire time. Unless a customer had accidentally been locked inside after closing. Maybe the employee I met in the parking lot hadn't noticed them and locked the doors before they managed to get out. Hello. I called out. In response, a long sob echoed back. My heart sank. The voice sounded like a woman, or maybe a child. I'm coming. I shouted and hurried toward the sound. Where are you? They didn't answer. They just kept crying. I rushed frantically toward the noise, reassuring them as I ran that everything would be okay. Then I stopped dead in my tracks. The sound. It was coming from aisle 7. Don't go into aisle 7. Don't look into aisle 7. The rules had been very clear about that. I stopped just outside the aisle, beside a mayonnaise display, and carefully pressed myself against it to avoid being seen. I'll help you. I called out. Can you tell me what happened? They finally spoke. But not to answer my question. Help. Help me. The trembling voice came through the sobs. Please. Please help me. I wanted to step into that aisle. One of my feet had already lifted off the floor, ready to run in and comfort them. But something stopped me. An instinctive feeling. An alarm bell ringing inside my head. Because out of all the aisles, why was that person in aisle 7? Besides, they were safe. They were inside an empty store with me. This wasn't some dark alley in the middle of the night. Come out of that aisle. I called, my voice shaking slightly. Then I'll be able to help you. Please. The voice replied. Help me. It was ridiculous. Surely someone had been trapped inside after the store closed and was panicking. All I had to do was go into that aisle and help them get home. But inside my head, another part of me, a primitive survival instinct, was screaming at me not to move. Do you need me to call someone? I tried asking. Your parents? Your family? The police? Help me. The voice pleaded again. The way it said the words, help me, sounded exactly the same every time. There was a slight hesitation at the beginning of the sentence. An emphasis on the word me. It sounded like a recording or something generated by AI, repeating itself over and over. It didn't sound natural. Get out of that aisle. I shouted. Come out here and I'll help you. The sobbing grew louder, more frantic, more desperate. Help me. The voice pleaded again in a tone so desperate that it sent chills down my spine. I stood there, pressed against the mayonnaise display. Listening to them cry made my stomach churn, even though it sounded slightly unnatural. I thought about calling the police. They would know what to do. But I had left my phone in my backpack at Register 1. And to get it, I would have to pass by aisle 7. The rules never said anything about walking past aisle 7. Only that I wasn't allowed to enter it or look into it. I couldn't just stand there and do nothing. What if it really was someone who needed help? A child with a sprained ankle who couldn't stand up. Don't worry, I'll get my phone and call the police. I shouted. Then I took a deep breath and stepped past the boundary of aisle 7, heading toward the checkout area. The moment I crossed it, the crying stopped. Just like that. The intense sobbing vanished in an instant. Complete silence. As if someone had flipped a switch. Then the footsteps began. Heavy footsteps slammed against the floor as someone started running down the aisle. There was no way it could be a child. And they were charging straight toward me. My heart dropped. This was a trap. They were coming to kill me. And I was certain I was going to die here. But the moment I made it past the aisle, the sound stopped. All I could hear was the soft jazz music drifting from the speakers overhead. I sprinted back to the break room, completely forgetting about the shopping cart I was supposed to return. The break room was small and cramped. The small square window in the door had been covered from the inside with cardboard. The only source of light was the computer monitor on the desk, displaying the security camera feeds. I skimmed through the footage and quickly realized that none of the cameras were pointed toward aisle 7. It seemed the cameras had been deliberately positioned to avoid that area. After reviewing the grainy black and white footage for anything unusual, I leaned back in my chair and closed my eyes. When I opened them again, it was nearly 12:30 a.m. Time for the next patrol. I didn't want to go. I felt safe here, locked inside this little room. But I also knew I wouldn't be safe if I ignored the rules. I tried to imagine what might happen if I entered aisle 7. If I didn't listen. I forced myself out of the chair and walked toward the door. The store was completely quiet. No frantic sobbing. No pounding footsteps. I started my patrol from the back of the store, making my way toward aisle 17. The canned goods reflected the light from the shelves as I walked past. But when I looked closer, I didn't recognize any familiar brands. No Chef Boyardee ravioli. No Green Giant. Just rows of cans with generic labels that read, stew. In fact, the entire aisle contained nothing but stew. The cans were identical, repeating over and over again. I reached the end of the aisle and turned right, heading toward the front of the store. That's when I realized I had broken one of the rules. The shopping cart. I hadn't returned it to its proper place. It was no longer where I had left it. Instead of sitting crookedly near aisle 7, it was now parked neatly beside one of the checkout lanes. As if some ghostly customer was waiting in line to pay. I froze for a few seconds, my hand hovering over the handle. Then I grabbed it and pushed it toward the exit. Outside, the parking lot was swallowed by thick darkness. Not a single light pole was still illuminated. The cart return area was only a few steps from the door. I told myself. In and out. Just a few seconds. I moved as quickly as possible. I ran into the darkness. Shoved the cart into the row. Then sprinted back inside. After that, I shut the door and locked it. Okay. That wasn't too bad. I told myself, letting out a sigh of relief. For a brief moment, I enjoyed the peace of the store. The stillness. The safety of being locked inside with no one else around. Then I froze. The stillness. Oh no. The jazz music had stopped. How long had it been silent? I had been so focused on the shopping cart that I hadn't noticed. I sprinted toward the back of the store. Cookies and snack foods blurred past me as I ran. Then I turned right and rushed straight into the break room. I pulled out the list of rules and read them again. Under no circumstances may you end your shift early. Why had Clive written that? Was it simply to make sure nobody quit halfway through? Or would some horrible fate befall me if I left early? Because I really wanted to leave. I opened my backpack, pulled out the can of soda I had brought with me, popped it open, and took a sip. Then I skimmed through the security footage. 5 hours left. The next 4 patrols went fairly smoothly. The rules never specified how long a patrol had to last. So every 30 minutes, I ran a lap around the store as quickly as possible. The entire thing took about a minute. Then, for the remaining 29 minutes, I locked myself back inside the break room. During the second patrol, as I ran past the frozen food section, I heard knocking. At first, it was a light tapping against the glass. Then it gradually grew louder, as if someone were slamming the palm of their hand against the freezer door. According to the rules, I ignored it. I just kept running until I made it safely back to the break room. During the next patrol, the jazz music stopped again. I immediately changed direction and ran back toward the break room while the silence echoed in my ears. And now, I was back in the break room once more, with 3 hours remaining. I looked at the clock on my phone. Each second slowly ticked toward 3 a.m. I stood up, trying to shake the tension out of my body, preparing to run. Back in the day, I had been a track runner in high school. But over the last 10 years, I had gotten out of shape. The previous patrol had left me panting, my legs aching. My hand tightened around the doorknob. My heart pounded in my chest. 3, 2, 1. Let's go. I threw the door open and rushed out into the store. But I didn't get far. Because there was a large pool of blood on the floor. I froze. The air seemed to be sucked out of my lungs. I stood rooted in place, staring at the pool of blood glistening beneath the fluorescent lights. The rules said I had to clean it up. But that would take at least 10 minutes. I wasn't safe out here. I swallowed hard, then hurried to the supply room, grabbed a mop and a bucket, and started cleaning as quickly as possible. The job was a mess. I dragged the mop through the blood, then dipped it into the bucket. Over and over again. The soapy water in the bucket turned red. A few times, water splashed out and nearly hit me. But I finished. I cleaned it up without touching a single drop of blood. Unfortunately, by the time I was done, the clock read 3:27. It was already time for the next patrol. I was too tired to run. So I just walked quickly around the store. I passed through the frozen food section. This time, I noticed handprints on the glass doors. Handprints of all sizes, tilted and smeared. But their proportions weren't right. The fingers were too long, too thin. I looked away and kept moving. 2.5 hours left. The sound of my footsteps echoed across the tiled floor. The jazz music was starting to irritate me. I was pretty sure I had heard the same saxophone melody repeated 20 times by now. It made me want to punch something. Sighing, I continued through the produce section and hurried past the aisles. Then I stopped. Something caught my eye in one of the aisles. I stepped back and looked more closely. Someone was standing in aisle 9. A woman. She was wearing a blue linen dress and black high heels. Her long black hair hung down her back, almost reaching her waist. She stood with her back to me, completely motionless, her pale white arms hanging at her sides. In her hand was a basket. It was filled with raw cuts of meat. The rule echoed in my head. If you see a woman in the store, immediately go to the break room. Do not look into her eyes. I slowly backed away, trying to stay as quiet as possible. Then I turned into the next aisle, heading toward the break room. Click. 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 The sound of her high heels echoed across the tiled floor. I picked up my pace, hurrying toward the break room. But then I stopped. Her footsteps weren't coming from behind me. They were coming from in front of me. I looked down at the floor. Just in time to see a pair of shiny black high heels step into the aisle. I kept my eyes fixed on the ground. Don't look into her eyes. Don't look into her eyes. The words repeated over and over in my head. But I had to get to the break room. And she was blocking the way. All I could see were the polished black heels and the small drops of blood leaking from the packages of meat in her basket, splattering across the floor. I stepped backward. It was the only direction I could go. I kept my eyes on the floor, careful not to look up. But she followed me. Click. Click. With every step I took, another glossy black heel appeared, attached to a pale, slender calf, perfectly matching my movements. I moved faster. She did too. Click, click, click. I spun around and broke into a run. Click, click, click. I darted randomly into an aisle and sprinted toward the break room. Then, halfway down the aisle, I stopped short. A shopping cart was blocking the middle of the aisle. Not just one cart, but several stacked on top of one another, forming a crooked tower nearly as tall as the shelves. I was trapped. I backed away, my heart pounding. Click. The slow, steady footsteps moved toward me. Slowly, like a cat stalking its prey. I took a desperate gamble. I turned around, ran back into the open area, and entered the next aisle over. No. No, no, no. I knew immediately. A pile of gray rags and pale bluish skin lay curled up on the floor. The person, or rather, the creature, was curled into itself like a crying child. But it was clearly not human. It had strange bulges, twisted limbs, and no head at all. I had stepped into aisle 7. I immediately turned around. But before I could get far, the creature stretched itself out and began moving toward me. I screamed and ran for my life down the next aisle. Miraculously, I reached the end of the aisle without being harmed. I made a sharp left turn and sprinted toward the break room. Almost there. Almost there. My hand touched the doorknob. I twisted the handle and threw myself inside. Then I collapsed into a chair, gasping for breath. I took a deep breath and stared at the locked door. Was I really safe in here? The truth was, the rules never actually said I would be safe. Maybe being here only reduced the chances of me being killed. I shifted my gaze to the security monitor on the desk. The camera showed the center of the store, and from what I could see, the aisles were empty. There was no sign of the woman. I switched to the next camera. The produce section. Empty. I switched to another camera. I jumped. She was standing right there. Directly outside the break room door. She stood perfectly still like a statue, except for the thin stream of blood dripping from the packages of meat in her basket onto the floor. I swallowed hard and turned away from the screen, looking toward the door. My heart nearly burst from my chest when I saw her shadow beneath the gap under the door. Go away. Please, go away. I prayed silently. The shadow of her head tilted against the doorframe, as if she were considering her next move. Now I understood why the window had been covered. I forced myself to look away and turn back to the monitor. She was still standing there, but something was different about the way she stood. I squinted at the blurry black and white image, trying to figure out what was wrong. When my eyes settled on her high heels, I realized it. They were pointing forward. Then I collapsed into a chair, gasping for breath. I took a deep breath and stared at the locked door. Was I really safe in here? The truth was, the rules never actually said I would be safe. Maybe being here only reduced the chances of me being killed. I shifted my gaze to the security monitor on the desk. The camera showed the center of the store, and from what I could see, the aisles were empty. There was no sign of the woman. I switched to the next camera. The produce section. Empty. I switched to another camera. I jumped. She was standing right there. Directly outside the break room door. She stood perfectly still like a statue, except for the thin stream of blood dripping from the packages of meat in her basket onto the floor. I swallowed hard and turned away from the screen, looking toward the door. My heart nearly burst from my chest when I saw her shadow beneath the gap under the door. Go away. Please, go away. I prayed silently. The shadow of her head tilted against the doorframe, as if she were considering her next move. Now I understood why the window had been covered. I forced myself to look away and turn back to the monitor. She was still standing there, but something was different about the way she stood. I squinted at the blurry black and white image, trying to figure out what was wrong. When my eyes settled on her high heels, I realized it. They were pointing forward. Then I squeezed my eyes shut. The rules said not to look into her eyes. Did that count? What about through a screen? A trembling groan of terror escaped my throat as I covered my face with both hands. My entire body shook uncontrollably. When I finally peeked through my fingers, I saw her. She was crawling rapidly down the wall, moving away from the camera mounted on the ceiling, like a spider. Then she rushed through the glass doors and vanished into the night. She was gone. I was safe. Or at least as safe as anyone could be inside this cursed store. I glanced at the clock. 3:58 a.m. Time for another patrol. I really didn't want to go. But I forced myself to open the door and run through the store as fast as I could. I saw shopping carts stacked into swaying towers. I heard hands pounding against the freezer doors. I saw small spots of blood on the gleaming tile floor. The traces she had left behind while chasing me. And then, 1 minute later, I was done. I locked myself back inside the break room. And for the first time in years, I broke down and cried. The remaining patrols passed without incident. Though I still heard the crying from aisle 7 and the pounding from inside the freezer. And then, the moment finally arrived. 6 a.m. My heart soared when I saw the pale pink light of dawn through the glass windows. I was safe. I was free. When I looked out into the parking lot, I saw several cars pulling in. Tired, grumpy employees carrying cups of coffee walked toward the store. The moment the first person stepped inside, I bolted out of the building, jumped into my car, and drove away as fast as I could. I had never felt so relieved. So happy. I felt like a new person. All of my problems, even my financial troubles, seemed insignificant compared to what I had just survived. As I turned onto the main road, I rolled down the window and switched on the radio. But instead of the familiar classic rock station coming through the speakers, I heard a lively saxophone melody. And as I listened to that horrible tune repeating over and over again, I realized something. My days as the night security guard at West Market might not be over yet.